Ruth, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. What is it? Don't tell me you finally resigned from that stressful office. No, Anthony proposed to me. Oh my God! Congratulations! Jesus, Chika! I'm so happy for you. Finally! I was beginning to think this man would never propose. Can you imagine? I almost fainted that day. So when is the wedding? 3 weeks from now. Huh, that's very close. And before you ask, yes, you're my chief bridesmaid. Who else would it be? You know I'm your number one person. All right, let me start going before it gets late. Wait first. Okay. Take them home. No, I didn't come here for this. I know, that's why I'm giving them to you. You've done enough already, and I'll keep doing more if I can. What's that? Just transport money. Transport money? This envelope is too thick to be transport money. Don't open it here. Use it for whatever you need. Chika, thank you very much. Don't mention it. Come on, I'll walk you to the bus stop. Call me as soon as you get home. I will. And don't stress yourself too much over the wedding preparations. Bye, safe journey. Bye, I will.
The bus rumbled through the busy streets as passengers talked among themselves. Ruth sat quietly. The heavy bags of food rested on her lap. She slowly unzipped her handbag and brought out the envelope Chika had secretly slipped inside. She opened it. Several crisp naira notes stared back at her. She simply looked at the money. Then she let out a bitter laugh, a laugh that carried no joy. She pushed the envelope back into her bag and rested her head against the window. Inside her mind, old memories began to play one after another. She remembered back in secondary school. Teachers loved calling on her because she always knew the answers. Whenever examination results came out, her name was always at the very top. Chika's name was usually somewhere around the bottom. Whenever they returned home with their report cards, relatives would point at Ruth with admiration. Be like Ruth. See how intelligent this girl is. She's going to become somebody great one day. Even at the university, nothing changed. Ruth graduated with excellent grades. She was the one everyone believed had the brightest future, while Chika barely managed to finish. If anyone had told Ruth that years later she would be struggling to pay rent while Chika would be living comfortably in a beautiful apartment with a successful fiancé, she would have laughed in disbelief. But life had chosen a different script. Since graduation, every door Ruth knocked on seemed to remain closed. The few jobs she managed to get never lasted. Sometimes companies folded up. Sometimes she simply wasn't retained. Months turned into years. Her savings disappeared. Her dreams slowly faded. Meanwhile, everything seemed to work in Chika's favor. A good job, regular promotions, a nice apartment, a caring man who adored her, and now, a wedding. Ruth tightened her grip on the bag of groceries. She wasn't angry because Chika had succeeded. She was angry because she believed she deserved that life more. Why is it always her? She remembered all the times Chika had helped her, the rent she had paid for her, the money she sent without being asked, the food she always insisted Ruth should take home. Anyone else would have been grateful. But to Ruth, every act of kindness felt like an insult. It reminded her of everything she had failed to become. By the time the bus stopped at her destination, evening had already begun to settle. She climbed down slowly and walked through the narrow streets leading to her apartment. She unlocked the rusty door to her tiny one-room apartment and stepped inside. She dropped the bags of food on the small table. Then she sat quietly on the edge of her bed. For several minutes, she simply stared at the groceries. Things she should have been able to buy for herself. Instead, they had come from Chika. She counted the money in the envelope, 20,000 naira. It was enough to solve some of her immediate problems. Instead of smiling, tears rolled down her cheeks.
I was supposed to be the successful one. I did everything right. I studied harder. I sacrificed more. So why does she keep winning?
That night, while the rest of the neighborhood slept peacefully, Ruth lay awake with her eyes wide open. She wasn't thinking about Chika's wedding anymore. She was thinking about how to make sure that wedding would become the beginning of Chika's sorrow. The next morning, Ruth woke up after barely sleeping. The decision she had made the previous night still echoed in her mind, and she tried to push it away. Just then, her phone rang. It was Chika. Ruth stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering.
Hello, my bride-to-be. Ruth, guess what? What happened again? Anthony just paid for the wedding venue this morning. Wow, that's wonderful. And we've started sharing invitation cards too. I'm really happy for you. I'll come to your place this evening. We have plenty to discuss. Of course, you're my chief bridesmaid after all.
The moment the call ended, Ruth's cheerful expression disappeared. She tossed the phone onto the bed. She got dressed and stepped outside. She boarded a bus going to the outskirts of the town. When she got there, she started walking. After about 20 minutes, she arrived at an old compound hidden behind thick bushes. A rusty iron gate stood at the entrance. The entire place felt strangely quiet. Even the birds seemed afraid to sing there. Ruth looked around carefully to make sure nobody had followed her before slowly pushing the rusty gate open and stepping inside the compound. The place was quiet and isolated, surrounded by tall trees and thick bushes. An elderly man sat under a large tree at the far end of the compound, arranging some herbs in front of him. Ruth walked closer and greeted him politely. The man looked up and studied her face for a moment. He could tell from her nervous expression that she had come carrying a heavy burden. After a brief conversation, Ruth explained that she needed help with someone close to her. She spoke carefully, pouring out all her jealousy and bitterness. The herbalist listened without interrupting. He told her that matters involving another person's life and destiny required certain items before anything could be done. She would need to bring personal items connected to the person she wanted to affect, including strands of hair, a piece of clothing, or any item that carried their presence. He also told her he would need 2 small wooden dolls, one representing a man and the other representing a woman, which would be used during the ritual. Ruth listened carefully and agreed. The herbalist told her to come back when she had gathered everything she needed. Ruth thanked him and left the compound. She knew the decision she had made was dangerous, but the bitterness in her heart was stronger than her fear. By the time she reached the main road, her mind was already focused on one thing: the items she planned to secretly take from her best friend. A few weeks later, the long-awaited wedding day finally arrived. The venue was beautifully decorated with flowers, elegant fabrics, and sparkling lights. Family members traveled from different states to celebrate with the couple. Friends filled the hall with laughter, music, and excitement. Chika looked breathtaking in her wedding dress. Her face was glowing with happiness as she walked down the aisle toward Anthony, the man she loved. Anthony couldn't stop smiling. He looked at her as though he still couldn't believe he was about to spend the rest of his life with her. Standing proudly beside Chika throughout the ceremony was Ruth, the perfect best friend, the perfect chief bridesmaid. She helped adjust Chika's dress. She arranged her veil. She held her bouquet whenever Chika needed her hands free. She smiled in every photograph. She wiped tears from Chika's eyes when emotions overwhelmed her. To everyone watching, Ruth was the kind of friend every woman wished to have. Nobody could have imagined that behind that beautiful smile was a heart filled with resentment. Nobody knew that while everyone was celebrating the beginning of Chika's happiness, Ruth was already preparing to destroy it. Later that evening, after the wedding celebrations had ended and the couple had retired to begin their new life together, Ruth quietly returned to her hotel room. She carefully opened the small purse she was holding. Inside were the items she had secretly collected. During the wedding preparations earlier that day, she had taken a few strands of Chika's hair while helping her get ready. She had also carefully torn a small piece from the inner part of Chika's wedding gown while adjusting the dress, making sure nobody noticed. They were the final pieces she needed. She placed them carefully inside her bag and prepared for the next thing. The following afternoon, Ruth carefully packed the items into her handbag and quietly left her apartment. She made her way back to the herbalist's compound. After looking around to be sure no one had followed her, She pushed open the rusty gate and walked inside. The herbalist was waiting beneath the same large tree. Without wasting time, Ruth brought out everything she had gathered. The herbalist nodded in satisfaction. He then led Ruth into the small mud hut behind the compound. Inside, he spread a raffia mat on the floor and placed the two small wooden dolls on it, one representing a man and the other a woman. He arranged the items carefully around them and began performing the ritual. For several minutes, he chanted quietly while tying the two wooden dolls back to back with a black cord before placing them inside a clay pot and covering it. When he finally stopped, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at Ruth. The ritual was complete. From that moment onward, he told her, peace would gradually disappear from Chika and Anthony's marriage. A slow smile spread across Ruth's face. She thanked the herbalist, paid him his balance, and quietly left the shrine, convinced that everything had gone exactly according to her plan. 3 weeks later, Chika and Anthony returned from their honeymoon. At first, everything seemed perfect. They laughed together, cooked together, shared pictures from their trip online. Friends and family admired their love and constantly praised how happy they looked. Ruth watched every picture carefully from her phone. She smiled as she typed, "My favorite couple. God bless your home." To anyone who saw the comment, it looked like the words of a proud best friend, but only Ruth knew the truth. Behind the sweet message was a secret plan that had already begun. A few days later, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was Chika. A slow smile spread across her face before she answered.
Mrs. Anthony, how's married life? Please don't even start. Why? You don't sound happy. What's wrong? Anthony and I had our first serious argument yesterday. Really? Over what? He got home very late from work without calling. I was worried sick. When he finally came back, instead of apologizing, he said his phone battery died and I was overreacting. I told him he should have borrowed someone's phone to call me. He said I was making a big deal out of nothing. Before we knew it, we were both shouting. Oh, Chika, every marriage has little misunderstandings like that. Don't let it bother you too much. I hope so. It'll be fine. You two will laugh about it someday. I really hope you're right. Thanks, Ruth.
The moment Ruth hung up, she smiled to herself. It has started. The following week, another disagreement. This time, it started because Anthony had promised to accompany Chika to a friend's housewarming party. At the last minute, he called to say an urgent meeting had come up at work and he wouldn't be able to make it. Chika felt disappointed. She accused him of always putting work before their marriage. Anthony insisted he had no choice. What should have ended with a simple explanation quickly turned into a heated argument later that night. For the first time since they got married, Anthony slept in the sitting room. Once again, Chika called Ruth. Ruth listened patiently. She played the role of the caring best friend. She comforted Chika, advised her to let go of the misunderstanding, and reminded her that every marriage had its challenges. She even offered to speak to Anthony herself in hopes of settling the issue. True to her word, Ruth called Anthony. She spoke calmly and encouraged him to let the issue go. Anthony appreciated her concern. After the call ended, a big smile spread across her face. Months passed. The arguments became more frequent. One misunderstanding after another, one fight after another. Sometimes neither of them could even remember how the quarrel started. After every fight, one person was always present. Ruth. Sometimes she visited Chika. Other times she invited Chika over to her place. She listened, comforted, advised, prayed with her. Whenever Anthony felt frustrated, Ruth somehow found a way to speak to him too. Little by little, she earned Anthony's trust as well. Anthony often said, "At least your friend is mature. She always knows how to talk sense into you." Those words made Ruth smile. If only they knew. One Saturday afternoon, Chika and Anthony were having lunch together when the conversation drifted to their future. As they talked, they both agreed that the time had come to start trying for a baby. The thought filled them with excitement. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about names, decorating a future nursery, and how wonderful it would be to finally have children running around the house. Later that evening, unable to contain her excitement, Chika picked up her phone and called Ruth. She happily shared the good news, telling her that she and Anthony had finally decided to start trying for a baby. Ruth congratulated her warmly and wished them the very best. She sounded genuinely happy for her friend. But the moment the call ended, the smile on Ruth's face slowly disappeared. A dangerous thought crossed her mind. If Chika became a mother, she would have yet another reason to be happier than her. Ruth immediately knew what she had to do next. The next afternoon, Ruth returned to the herbalist's shrine once again. This time, the bitterness in her heart had grown even stronger. She told the herbalist that she wanted to place another spiritual attack on Chika. The problems in the marriage alone were no longer enough for her. She wanted Chika to experience the pain of waiting endlessly for a child. The herbalist listened quietly as Ruth poured out everything in her heart. For a brief moment, he tried to make her reconsider, reminding her that she had already done enough. But Ruth refused to change her mind. She insisted that Chika must never become a mother. Seeing that her mind was made up, the herbalist stood up and walked inside the hut. The herbalist gathered a few ritual items from inside the hut and began his incantations. Ruth sat quietly, watching as he performed the ceremony without saying a word. After several minutes, the ritual was complete. He informed Ruth that it had been done. A satisfied smile spread across Ruth's face. She thanked the herbalist, paid him, and quietly left the shrine, convinced that Chika's dream of becoming a mother had just been taken away. Back in the city, life went on. Weeks turned into months, and before long, a year had passed. Chika and Anthony waited eagerly for the good news they had been praying for. At the end of every month, Chika would hope that perhaps this time things would be different. But each month ended in disappointment. At first, she wasn't too worried. She kept assuring herself that it would happen in God's time. But as the months stretched into a year with no pregnancy, relatives and family friends began asking uncomfortable questions whenever they visited. Each question brought a smile to Chika's face, but deep inside, it broke her heart. Eventually, she and Anthony decided to visit a hospital. After carrying out several medical tests, the doctors confirmed that there was nothing medically wrong with either of them. Both of them were healthy. There was no clear explanation for why pregnancy had not occurred. The news left them even more confused. That evening, Chika called Ruth and shared everything with her. Ruth comforted her, encouraged her not to lose hope, and assured her that everything would be fine with time. To Chika, those were the words of a loving best friend. Another year passed. Although arguments still occurred from time to time, Chika and Anthony had gradually learned how to handle their misunderstandings. Instead of allowing little disagreements to grow into major fights, they began choosing peace over pride. Whenever one person became angry, the other would remain calm until emotions settled. Slowly, their home became happier again. The pain of waiting for a child remained, but it was no longer enough to destroy the love they had for each other. This development secretly infuriated Ruth. She couldn't understand how, after everything she had done spiritually, Chika and Anthony were still laughing together, going out together, and doing everything possible to protect their marriage. Every happy picture they posted online annoyed her. Every smile on Chika's face felt like an insult. The storms she had unleashed were supposed to tear them apart. Instead, they seemed to be growing even stronger. One evening, Chika invited Ruth over for dinner. The three of them ate together, laughed, and reminisced about their university days. Watching them, no one would have imagined that one person seated at the table had spent years trying to destroy the very home she was now enjoying. As Ruth was leaving, Anthony walked her to the door. He sincerely thanked her for always supporting Chika through the difficult times and for being such a dependable friend. Ruth simply smiled and assured him that Chika was like a sister to her and that she would always be there whenever they needed her. The words sounded genuine, But only Ruth knew they were the biggest lie she had ever told. A few days later, unable to hide her frustration any longer, Ruth returned to the herbalist's shrine. The happiness gradually returning to Chika and Anthony's home had become unbearable for her to watch. Their marriage was surviving every storm she had sent against it. She wanted it to end completely. The herbalist listened quietly as Ruth explained what she wanted. After a long silence, he slowly shook his head. He explained that destroying the marriage completely was different from causing misunderstandings. As long as Chika and Anthony remained faithful to each other and kept their hands clean, such a charm would have nothing to hold on to. Ruth persuaded the herbalist to give on with the ritual. He warned Ruth that if the ritual was carried out and neither of them stained their hands within 7 days, the charm would return to the person who sent it. Ruth remained silent for a few moments before looking him straight in the eyes. She told him to go on with the charm, that she has a plan. When he realized her mind was made up, he reluctantly performed the ritual. After it was completed, he reminded her once again that she had only 7 days. If either Chika or Anthony soiled their hands before then, the marriage would collapse. But if they didn't, the consequences would be inevitable. Ruth left the shrine with a confident smile, convinced she had everything under control. Chika, you've always trusted me, and that's exactly why this will work. The next morning, Ruth called Chika and asked if she could come over. Chika gladly agreed. An hour later, Ruth arrived at the house and found Chika arranging some clothes in the bedroom. After they chatted for a while, Ruth carefully steered the conversation toward Chika's inability to conceive. She suggested that perhaps the problem wasn't Chika at all. Maybe Anthony was the one unable to father a child. Chika immediately dismissed the idea, reminding Ruth that the doctors had already confirmed that both of them were medically fine. Ruth insisted that doctors could sometimes be wrong, and hinted that there was only one way to know the truth. When Chika asked what she meant, Ruth cautiously suggested that she sleep with another man just once to find out whether she could become pregnant. Chika was stunned. She immediately rejected the suggestion and firmly told Ruth that she loved her husband too much to ever consider cheating on him. Realizing she had gone too far, Ruth quickly laughed it off and claimed she was only trying to help. But as she left the house that day, she couldn't hide the worry growing inside her. 3 days later, Ruth tried again. This time, she invited Chika out for lunch. Throughout their conversation, she kept bringing up stories of women who later discovered that their husbands were infertile. She repeatedly hinted that Chika was wasting the best years of her life waiting for Anthony, but Chika refused to entertain the discussion. She defended her husband at every opportunity and made it clear that she trusted him completely. Ruth forced a smile throughout the meal, but inside, she was becoming desperate. On the 6th day, the pressure was becoming unbearable. Only 1 day remained. Early that morning, Ruth showed up unannounced at Chika's house. This time, she no longer bothered to hide her intentions. She pleaded with Chika one last time, insisting that spending just one night with another man would finally reveal whether Anthony was truly capable of having children. The words hit Chika like a slap. She stared at Ruth in complete disbelief. Then anger took over. She demanded to know what kind of friend would encourage a married woman to betray her husband. The more Ruth tried to justify herself, the angrier Chika became. She reminded Ruth of everything she had done for her over the years, only for her to repay that kindness with such terrible advice. Finally, Chika pointed toward the door and asked Ruth to leave her house immediately. Ruth stood there for a few seconds, hoping Chika would calm down. She didn't. Quietly, she picked up her handbag and walked out. As she stepped onto the street, the confidence she had carried for days completely disappeared. Tomorrow was the 7th and final day, and despite all her efforts, her plan had failed. Ruth hardly slept that night. She tossed from one side of the bed to the other as the herbalist's warning echoed repeatedly in her mind. He had told her that if Chika and Anthony refused to soil their hands within 7 days, the charm would return to the person who sent it. Again and again, Ruth tried to convince herself that everything would be fine. Morning finally arrived. Ruth hurriedly got dressed without eating breakfast and left for the shrine. Throughout the journey, her heart refused to settle. About an hour later, she arrived at the herbalist's compound. Immediately, something felt wrong. The place was unusually quiet. There was no sound of birds, no movement, no sign of anyone around. A strange feeling crept over her as she slowly pushed open the rusty gate and walked inside. She called out for the herbalist several times, but there was no response. Growing uneasy, she made her way toward the small mud hut at the back of the compound. The door was slightly open. With trembling hands, she pushed it wider. The sight before her made her freeze. The herbalist was lying motionless on the floor. His walking stick rested beside him. His eyes remained wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Ruth slowly approached and gently touched his shoulder. His body was cold, ice cold. At that very moment, a sudden gust of wind swept through the hut, extinguishing the small oil lamp that had been burning in one corner. The room instantly fell into darkness. Terrified, Ruth let out a scream and bolted out of the shrine. She didn't stop running until she reached the main road. Panting heavily, she turned to look behind her. Nobody was there. People continued going about their normal activities, completely unaware of what she had just witnessed. Trying desperately to calm herself, Ruth kept repeating that the herbalist had probably died of old age and that his death had nothing to do with her. But no matter how many times she said it, the fear in her heart refused to go away. That night, Ruth lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. Close to midnight, she finally drifted off. A few minutes later, she suddenly found herself standing inside the same shrine. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning, only this time, the herbalist was standing. He wasn't saying anything. He was simply staring at her. Ruth's heart nearly stopped. He slowly raised one trembling finger and pointed behind her. Ruth turned. Standing a few feet away was a dark, translucent figure. Its shape looked almost human. Its face was impossible to make out. It didn't move. It only stood there. Ruth let out a terrified scream and woke up. She was drenched in sweat. Her breathing was fast. "It was only a dream," she whispered. Just then, she noticed something. There was a shadow reflected in the mirror opposite her bed. It looked like someone was standing behind her. Ruth turned around slowly. There was nobody there. She looked back at the mirror. The shadow was gone. For the first time since visiting the shrine, Ruth felt something she had never felt before. Pure fear. The following morning, Ruth tried to convince herself that everything she had seen the previous night was nothing more than a nightmare. She forced herself to carry on with her day. She swept her room, cooked a little food, even tried watching television. But no matter what she did, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that someone was watching her. Several times, she turned around suddenly, but didn't see anything. That evening, she stepped outside to buy bread from a nearby shop. The streets were busy as usual. Everything looked normal. As Ruth waited for the shopkeeper to attend to her, she casually looked across the road. Her heart skipped. Standing beneath a mango tree was the same dark, translucent figure from her dream, completely still, facing her. Ruth blinked. The figure didn't move. She quickly rubbed her eyes. When she looked again, it was still there. The shopkeeper stretched out a loaf of bread to her, but Ruth didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the figure. Ruth slowly pointed across the road and asked if he could see the person standing under the tree. The shopkeeper frowned and told her that there was nobody there. Ruth looked back. The figure was gone. She quickly grabbed the bread and hurried home. Over the next 4 days, the figure appeared more often. Whenever Ruth looked into a mirror, she saw it standing behind her. She began avoiding mirrors completely. Then, it started appearing in broad daylight. Always silent, always staring, never speaking. Every day, it seemed to move a little closer. Every night she heard strange whispers calling her name and demanding that she confess. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same dark figure drawing closer. Sometimes she woke up gasping for breath, convinced invisible hands were squeezing her neck. She stopped going to work, stopped answering calls, stopped speaking to anyone. She couldn't sleep. Dark circles formed under her eyes. Her neighbors noticed the change and asked if she was okay. But she wasn't. The torment continued. No one else could see it, only her. One afternoon, the torment became unbearable. The figure suddenly began chasing her through the streets. Terrified and completely out of options, Ruth ran without thinking. The only place that came to her mind was Chika's house. She burst through the gate, crying and screaming. Chika rushed outside in shock. The moment Ruth saw her, she collapsed to her knees. Between uncontrollable tears and gasps for breath, she confessed everything. She confessed how jealousy had consumed her, how she had visited the herbalist, how she had tied Chika and Anthony's marriage, how she had spiritually prevented them from having children, how she had tried to convince Chika to betray her husband so the final charm could destroy the marriage completely. Chika stood frozen. Every word felt like a knife piercing her heart. She couldn't believe that the woman she had trusted like a sister had been behind every pain she and Anthony had endured. Before Chika could even react, Ruth suddenly looked toward the gate. The dark figure was there again, slowly walking towards her. Ruth screamed in terror. She jumped to her feet and bolted out of the house. She ran wildly into the street, shouting and begging the unseen figure to leave her alone. People watched in confusion as she ran from something only she could see. The more she ran, the more terrified she became. Eventually, she completely lost touch with reality. By the time people managed to restrain her, Ruth no longer recognized anyone. Not Chika, not herself. She had completely lost her mind. A few weeks later, Ruth was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Doctors diagnosed her with a severe mental breakdown. No treatment seemed to help. She spent her days staring into empty corners, mumbling words nobody understood. Sometimes she screamed in terror, insisting that someone was standing beside her. Months later, she escaped from the hospital. Nobody knew how. From that day on, people often saw a mad woman wandering from one street to another, barefoot and dirty, talking to herself. Meanwhile, Chika struggled to come to terms with the shocking confession. For days, she could barely believe that the woman she had loved like a sister had been behind so much pain. Rather than allow bitterness to consume her, she and Anthony chose to seek God's help together. They prayed. They rebuilt the trust that had been tested for years. Little by little, the strange tension that had once surrounded their home disappeared. Their marriage became stronger than it had ever been. Several months later, after years of waiting and countless disappointments, Chika discovered she was pregnant. The news brought tears of joy to both her and Anthony. Months later, they welcomed a healthy baby into the world. As Chika held her child in her arms, she couldn't help but reflect on everything they had survived. She realized that not every smiling face is a sincere friend, and not everyone who comforts you truly wants your happiness. Some people celebrate with you in public while secretly praying for your downfall. Thanks for watching.